So for today's lesson class, we're going to tackle your lesson 3, red blood cells and heme metabolism. So let's start with your erythropoiesis class. Now, erythropoiesis class is defined as the process by which erythrocytes are produced. Now, please take note of this. Pag erythropoiesis class, this would occur if your body detects low oxygen levels. Now, when your body detects low oxygen levels, magsisend yan ng signal towards the kidney. And from the kidney class, it would secrete erythropoietin. And erythropoietin would go to the bone marrow, and from the bone marrow, it would cause the creation of of your erythroblasts. So, yan ang inyong erythropoiesis. So again, erythropoiesis is the process by which erythrocytes are produced. This would occur, class, when a low oxygen level is detected by the body. It would send a signal to the kidney. The kidney would secrete your erythropoietin, which would go to the bone marrow and would start the creation of your erythroblasts. Now, normally 1% of all RBC is destroyed and replaced in the body every day, class, every day. So, normally 1%. So, if you have around, let's say, 100 million RBCs, class, sa katawan nyo, 1 million everyday, class, ang nasisira at nare-replace. Now, RBCs would exist and develop in the bone marrow, and macrophages would serve to supply the developing RBC with iron for hemoglobin synthesis. So later i-explain ko yan sa inyo, class, bakit macrophages. So, you may be wondering, sir, di ba ang macrophages pang ano lang yan? Pang defense lang yan? But how could it supply iron to developing RBC? So later I will explain that. Now, maturation of RBC, class. So, 4 mitotic divisions would occur between the pronormoblasts and the polychromatophilic normoblast stage. Therefore, class, 16 mature RBCs are produced from each pronormoblast. Now, RBCs, class, have a lifespan of 120 days. So, 120 days, class, ang kanilang lifespan. And EPO is the main hormone produced in the kidney in response to tissue hypoxia. It works in conjunction with your interleukin 3 to induce erythropoiesis. So please take note of that. Erythropoietin would work with interleukin 3 to induce erythropoiesis. Now, what are the actions of your erythropoietin? So ito sila, class. They would induce committed progenitor cells, yung BFUE and yung CFUE, in the bone marrow to differentiate and proliferate into pronormoblasts. Pag sinabi mong BFUE, class, ito yung tinatawag nating burst forming unit. Burst forming unit, class. Ito yung nagge-generate. They generate large erythroid colonies. So basically, class, it would start the creation of your erythroblasts by inducing those BFU and CFU. Yung CFU naman, class, yun yung colony forming unit. Yung E dyan, class, would stand for erythroid. So we have yung burst forming unit erythroid and colony forming unit erythroid. This, both of them would generate large erythroid colonies. So first, class, first what would happen is that it would induce the committed progenitor cell to become a burst forming unit erythroid. After that, class, si burst forming unit nyo will become a colony forming unit erythroid. And from there, it would continue na to produce the different stages of your erythroblasts. So again, actions of EPO is that it would induce yung progenitor cell to form a verse-forming unit erythroid that would generate large erythroid colonies. Later on, class, itong BFUE would become a colony-forming unit erythroid. Then another action of your EPO is that it would shorten the generation time of your pro-normoblasts. And it would also promote the early release of reticulocytes to the peripheral blood. So please copy. Okay, so let's continue. So this is the sequence of your erythropoiesis class. So kanina 'di ba parang binigyan ko lang kayo ng summary. Ito talaga yung a much better explanation. So the sequence of erythropoiesis class would start like this. Whenever there would be a decrease in arterial oxygen content, this would be followed by decrease in tissue oxygen. If you still remember class, di ba, meron tayong dalawang klase ng blood vessel. Or rather, tatlo pala. Tatlong klase. Yung artery, yung veins, yung capillaries. Now, yung artery nyo class would contain oxygenated blood. Oxygenated blood from lungs, and it would go to the tissues. Now, if your body or your oxygenated blood has very low, or basically there would be decrease in arterial oxygen content, since onti yung oxygen dun sa arterial blood nyo, this is going to be followed by a decrease in tissue oxygen. And when that happens, class, this would lead to what you call hypoxia. Now, with hypoxia, class, this would cause to send a signal. Magsisend ngayon ng signal yung body nyo to the kidney. EPO would be released from the kidney and would stimulate undifferentiated reticulum cells to form into pro-normoblasts. The increased red cell mass will increase the amount of hemoglobin available to deliver the oxygen. So ganito yan, class, to simplify this third statement. The more RBC present, the more hemoglobin present. And the more hemoglobin present, class, the more oxygen can be carried. So yan ang compensatory mechanism ng body natin, class. If your body, ulitin ko ha, if your body detects low oxygen levels, it would react by compensating with producing increased red blood cell. And with increased red blood cell, class, there would be increased hemoglobin present, allowing more oxygen to be carried by the blood to the tissues, thereby increasing tissue oxygen level. Now, elevated EPO class can be seen in erythroid hyperplasia. Now, if you still remember, kapag may erythroid hyperplasia ka class, continuous, burahin ko muna yung ano. Kapag may erythroid hyperplasia ka class, continuous ang production ng inyong continuous production of your red blood cell. And due to that, class, it would cause an elevated EPO. Another one would be your aplastic anemia. Now, ano ba tong aplastic anemia na to, class? This is a type of anemia. Please write this down. This is a type of anemia characterized by a defective bone marrow. Now, what happens here in aplastic anemia class is that due to this defective bone marrow, your bone marrow cannot produce enough cells. Therefore, class, you would have decreased RBC. And with decreased RBC class, it would again cause your body to send a signal. So, mababa ang RBC in aplastic anemia, mababa din ang oxygen carrying capacity ng blood. And oxygen carrying capacity. And this would cause class for the body to continuously secrete EPO. Kasi yung body mo, your body detects that there is not enough red blood cell. Therefore, the body would compensate by continuously creating or secreting EPO. So that's your aplastic anemia. And even though class, the body keeps on secreting EPO, it's not being effective kasi pagdating ni EPO nyo, when your EPO reaches the bone marrow is defective. Hindi rin siya class makapag-create ng red blood cells na mature. Puro blast lang yung nagagawa niya. Kasi the bone marrow is defective. So that will be tackled class yung aplastic anemia na yan in the finals. I'll give you a better overview of that. So ganun siya. So this is a anemia with a defective bone marrow. Since there is a defective bone marrow, decrease ang red blood cell, decrease ang oxygen carrying capacity, and the signal of the body would be compensated by continuously secreting EPO. And that would lead to since continuous ang EPO nyo class at defective ang bone marrow nyo, hindi pa rin siya makaka-create ng ano. So, to simplify that, there is no correction na mangyayari. Marami kang ang EPO pero even though you have so much EPO or erythropoietin, your body or your bone marrow is still not able to produce enough red blood cell. So, ganun siya. Then you could also see class decrease EPO in polycythemia vera. Polycythemia vera or your PCV class is what we call an increased production of RBC, WBC, and platelets class. Sobrang dami nito class. Now, due to the increased production of increased production of RBC, this would lead to a decrease erythropoietin. Abnormal class ang creation ng red blood cell nyo. Continuously, tuloy-tuloy ang pag-create and that would lead to decreased erythropoietin. Another one would occur class is after blood transfusion. After blood transfusion class, of course, sinalinan ka ng blood. So expected, mataas yung RBC mo. And due to this very high amount of RBC, your body would again send a signal o onti ang erythropoietin mo. Kasi your body does not detect any abnormality for it to secrete EPO. Kasi normal yung RBC mo, madami pa nga. So those are the two decreased EPO seen in polycythemia vera and after blood transfusion. Now, these are the substances class needed for erythropoiesis. We have number one, your iron. Your iron is responsible for the proliferation and maturation of erythrocyte. Then there's also your folic acid and your vitamin B12, which is responsible for normal DNA replication and cell division. Class, kapag kayo nagkaroon ng decrease vitamin B12, decrease folic acid, this would lead to a type of anemia known as your megaloblastic anemia. Magkakaroon ka ng megaloblastic anemia class. And one of the known characteristics of megaloblastic anemia, isulat mo dyan sa handouts nyo, is that with megaloblastic anemia class, there is what we call the presence of macrocytes. These are large red blood cells. So sa finals class, i-explain ko paano nangyari ang large RBCs na yan or macrocytes. Now, other substances needed for erythropoiesis class are your manganese, your cobalt, your zinc, your vitamin C, E, B5, thiamine, riboflavin, and your pantothenic acid, which are all needed for your normal erythropoiesis. Then we have your erythropoietin, thyroxine, androgen. We have your intrinsic factor and a healthy bone marrow. So please copy. All right, let's continue class. Let's talk about the structure of your RBC. Now, mature RBCs class or mature erythrocytes are 6 to 8 micrometer in size. The average is 7.2 micrometer in diameter. They have a thickness about 1.5 to 2.5. Average is 2. They have a corpuscular volume of 75 to 95 femtoliters. Class, when you say corpuscular volume, we're talking about here the mean cell volume. Meaning, class, this refers to the capacity. Capacity of the cell. Yung kayang laman. The amount that it would carry is between 75 to 95 femtoliters. Average is 87 femtoliters. And they have a surface area class of 130 to 150 square yan ka sa square micrometer. Square micrometer. Di ba yung pag nagsusukat kayo ng lupa, square meter, ganon. So, same with the surface area of your RBC. Ang unit is square micrometer. Average is 120, 135 square micrometer. Now, the cell would possess a central pallor which is about one-third of its diameter. So, ito daw central pallor na to, class, itong nasa gitna, is one-third of its diameter. Ganon siya kalaki. One-third ng diameter na yan. Now, when RBCs are unstained, class, under the microscope, they appear light greenish yellow in color. So kapag unstained sila, class, they appear light greenish yellow in color. They have a biconcave shape and thus would be often be called discocytes, causing the cell to appear lighter in the center than in the periphery. Some cells may have a cup or spherical shape. So please copy. Okay, sige, let's continue. This is the composition class of your erythrocytes. Now, erythrocytes class are 60% water and 40% solid. Now, your erythrocytes class would also contain what we call hemoglobin. Now, hemoglobin class is the iron-bearing protein which serves as the most important agent in the erythrocyte. RBC membrane structure and biochemistry would be enclosed by a lipid bilayer 4 to 5 millimeter in thickness. So ang structure niya class is a lipid bilayer, primarily composed of phospholipid, cholesterol, and even some glycolipid. Now, they are composed as well of membrane proteins that can be classified as two types. Meron tayong dalawang two types class ng membrane protein. We have what we call the peripheral protein, which can be dissociated in intact form by simple detergent extraction of RBC ghost cell. So again, class, yung peripheral proteins nyo, pwede silang ma-dissociate or pwede silang masira by using simple detergent extraction of RBC, producing what we call ghost cells. Now, ano ba tong ghost cells na to, class? Ghost cells, class, are RBCs found in the urine. They tend to appear clear. Mukha silang, kaya sila tinawag na ghost cells, class, kasi clear sila. Ganyan. And then, we have your integral or transmembrane proteins. This is only dissociated after using harsher extraction techniques. So please copy. So aside from being found in the urine, class, ang ghost cells nyo kasi, aside from it being clear, they would lack a nuclear and cytoplasmic details. Very clear sila, class, pag nakita na yan. So please copy. Okay, let's continue. So let's talk about class, the first one, itong peripheral proteins niya. This would compose the membrane skeleton and are located adjacent to the cytoplasmic surface of the phospholipid bilayer. They are composed of the following proteins, class. So I gave this as an assignment sa inyo. So please take note, class, that since it's an assignment, it would be included in your exam and in your quiz number 3. So number 1, class, we have yung spectrin. Sorry for the spelling. Spectrin, SPECTRIN. Ankyrin, protein 4.1, actin, and your tropomyosin. Then we have yung integral or transmembrane protein. They are found in the phospholipid bilayer and are anchored to the peripheral protein meshwork at specific joints. We have yung protein band 3, glycopyrene A, B, C, and D would contain a high content of sialic acid residue, giving the negative charge of RBC. Now, glycopyrenes would also serve as RBC receptors for certain bacterial, viral, and parasitic organisms. Okay, here's what you need to remember here, class. Meron tayong tinatawag na sialic acid. Now, itong sialic acid na to class is produced or would come from glycophorenes A, B, C, and D. So, kunwari ito yung red blood cells nyo class. Now, found on the surface dito, sa layer niya, itong bilayer na to, found here in this layer is the sialic acid. Now, due to this sialic acid class, the RBC would get a negative charge. And if you still remember, if you're in your P6, kung nagkaroon kayo ng physics na subject, physics in physics class, it states there that negative charge would repel negative charge, or similar charge, or yung same charge would repel one another. So, negative charge class would repel a negative charge cell also. Now, due to this ability that would repel negative charge to one another class, it acts as a type of defense layer. And this negative charge class is known as what we call the zeta potential. Kasi in this zeta potential class or negative charge of RBC, he could repel other negatively charged substances. So ulitin ko class, sialic acid which is found on the surface of your RBC due to glycophorenes would repel or would cause a negative charge of your RBC. This negative charge is known as your zeta potential. And the zeta potential class would allow your RBCs to repel other negatively charged cells. It acts as a type of defense layer. Now, glycophorenes class, please take note of this, would also serve as RBC receptor for certain bacterial, viral, and parasitic organisms. Then we have yung protein 4.5. This is for glucose transporter. This is a thin and pliable membrane that would retain potassium in high concentration and excluding sodium. It allows hydrogen, chloride, and bicarbonate ions to pass freely into or out of the cell in proportion to the ions gradient. If you still remember, ewan ko naturo na to sa inyo. Let's talk about yung potassium and yung inyong sodium. Now, ang potassium nyo class is inside the cell. Now, due to this protein 4.5 class, it allows your potassium to be retained in high concentration inside the cell and would prevent sodium from entering. But it would allow the following ions, hydrogen, chloride, and bicarbonate ions to pass freely into or out of the cell in proportion to the ions gradient. So, for you to easier understand this class, yung protein 4.5 nyo na yan yung nagre-retain ng potassium sa loob ng cell and it would prevent sodium from entering it. It allows hydrogen, chloride, and bicarbonate ions to pass freely. And then meron tayong mga enzymes class. They include your carbonic anhydrase, your methemoglobin reductase, catalase, G6PD, pyruvate kinase, nucleoside phosphorylase, glutathione phosphorylase, lactate dehydrogenase, aldolase, adenosine deaminase, and your acetylcholinesterase. So yan yung mga enzymes. So again, I gave this as a homework. This would be included in your quiz or exam next meeting. So please copy. Okay, let's continue. Let's talk about class your heme metabolism. Now, iron class is an integral part of hemoglobin synthesis. Iron in the RBC is known as heme. So, class, please remember that if iron is found inside the RBC, it is known as heme. Now, at the end of the lifespan of RBCs are engulfed by macrophages of the MPS. The MPS class or the mononuclear, sulat nyo to, mononuclear phagocyte phagocyte system. Now, itong engulfing na to class, di ba, if you still remember sa immunosero nyo, now, yung graveyard ng RBC nyo is the spleen. Now, in the spleen class, yung mga monocytes, yung mga macrophages doon, would engulf this old RBCs, where iron is extracted from the hemoglobin. Some of the iron class are stored in the MPS. So, yung mga iron na yun class would go to the macrophages. So, pagka-engulf or pagka-phagocytize nung mga old RBCs, the iron would be either stored in the macrophages or as ferritin, or it would be stored as hemosiderin, or most are delivered to the plasma where it is bound to transferrin, completing the iron cycle. So yung transferrin nyo class, that is the one, excuse me, this is the protein, plasma protein. This is a plasma protein class that carries iron. So ayun siya. So please copy. Now, synthesis of hemoglobin class would occur is number one, we have your heme synthesis. They would occur in most red blood cell of the body except in mature red blood cell, but most abundantly in erythroid precursor. So, ang heme synthesis niya class would occur in most red blood cell of the body except sa mga mature one. Mas madami sila in erythroid precursors or yung mga young cells. Now, another part of hemoglobin class is your globin part or your globin synthesis. Ang globin nyo, this is the protein part. Now, globin synthesis class would occur in the cytoplasm of erythroblasts and reticulocyte. Begins in the latter half of your polychromatophilic normoblast stage and can continue until the reticulocyte stage. So please copy. Ang hemosiderin class, ito yung iron trapped in tissues. So please remember that. Ang ferritin nyo, yan yung iron inside macrophages. So please copy. Okay, let's continue. Let's talk about class your RBC destruction. So RBC have a lifespan of 120 days. As the RBC mature class, they become senescent red blood cell. Senescent meaning old red blood cells, where there is loss of sialic acid, diminished enzyme activity, and have a similar surface area and increased MCHC compared with younger cells. They are more liable to phagocytosis. Now, itong MCHC na to class, this would refer to your mean corpuscular corpuscular hemoglobin concentration. Then they are more liable to phagocytosis. Now, ano ba yung mga mechanisms of RBC destruction? The first one would be fragmentation. There would be a loss of a portion of the RBC membrane accompanied by a loss of cellular content, including hemoglobin. Then there would be osmotic lysis. Passing of water into the red cell has to ultimately burst it. So, class, in osmotic lysis, we have what you call different concentrations ng solution. If I don't know if you know this, itong hypertonic, isotonic, and yung tinatawag nating hypotonic. Now, when you put an RBC in a hypertonic solution class, the RBC would crenate, magkre-crenate siya or mag-shrink siya. If you put if you put class an RBC in a hypotonic solution, it would swell and then it would burst, becoming what we call a ghost cell. Pag isotonic naman class, the RBC would retain shape. Now, paano mo ba malalaman kung hypertonic o hypotonic yung isang solution class? Most of the time class, that would the depend on the concentration. Salt concentration of a solution. Yung tinatawag nating NSS. Itong NSS, this is the normal saline solution. And this is an example of isotonic. Ngayon, pag tinaasan mo yung concentration ng salt niyan, it would become hypertonic. Pag binabaan mo, it would become hypotonic. So that's how osmotic lysis would occur. Passing of water into the red cell as to ultimately burst it, leading to your hemolysis. And this would usually occur in osmotic lysis. And then a third mechanism class is yung erythrophagocytosis. Ingestion of whole RBC by circulating monocyte or neutrophil or by fixed macrophages of the mononuclear phagocyte system. Then we have yung complement-induced cytolysis. Complement has the ability to attach itself to the cell and induce lysis. This would occur when fixation of the complement would occur in the reaction between cellular antigen and antibody. So, yung complement class, mas maintindihan yan, yung cytolysis na yan sa immunosero. Then we have yung hemoglobin denaturation. RBC are exposed to oxidant stress and the mechanism to protect the cell from such damage fails to work. This causes the creation of Heinz bodies, which are precipitates of denatured hemoglobin. So kapag tinanong kayo, class, what are Heinz bodies? These are denatured hemoglobin. Naalala nyo pa yung Howell Jolly nyo? Di ba yung Howell Jolly bodies nyo? These are RNA. Precipitates naman yan ng mga RNA nyo. So please copy. Okay, let's continue. Then we have class the types of RBC destruction. We have yung intravascular hemolysis. Intravascular class, meaning RBC lysis would occur within the circulation. So within the blood vessel class, through the classical pathway of your complement. Then this is caused by sensitization of complement with RBC. 10% of senescent RBCs would go through this. So very few class, 10% lang ang nade-destroy through this type of hemolysis. While we have yung extravascular hemolysis, RBC would occur would lyse RBC lysis would occur outside the circulation. This would occur in the liver, the spleen, and happens through phagocytosis. 90% of RBCs goes through this. Very important tong extravascular hemolysis class kasi this allows the recycle or nare-recycle yung the one being recycled would be yung heme through this process. Kaya 90% of RBCs goes through this. So please copy. Okay, class. So let's talk about the intravascular hemolysis diagram. So please copy along. So let's say, class, there would be an intravascular hemolysis. So RBC would be hemolyzed or it would be destroyed through hemolysis and it would release hemoglobin. Now, hemoglobin class would now bind. It will now bind to what we call haptoglobin. Now, haptoglobin class, isulat mo somewhere dyan sa papel, is a plasma protein. Is a plasma protein that binds to free hemoglobin. Now, when the hemoglobin would bind to haptoglobin class, what happens next is that it would be processed by the mononuclear phagocyte system. Now, when that happens, class, haptoglobin haptoglobin would be depleted. And once it is depleted, class, haptoglobin would now be excreted. It would now be excreted as free hemoglobin, or may tatlong possibility, class, or it would be converted to hemosiderin, or another one is that the free hemoglobin would be oxidized to met hemoglobin, wherein this free hemoglobin oxidized to met hemoglobin class would now become heme. Now, in the plasma protein class or in the plasma liquid portion, meron tayong tinatawag na hemopexin. Now, hemopexin class is also a plasma protein. Ang pinagkaiba lang niya, itong hemopexin na to is a plasma protein that would bind to heme. Now, heme class would now bind with your hemopexin. Now, once it binds to hemopexin class, it would now be available for transport to the liver. Now, this is a plasma protein that would now transport the heme. It would transport heme to the liver, to the liver, to the liver to be catabolized, catabolize, or for catabolism. So ulitin ko class, in intravascular hemolysis class, your RBC would undergo hemolysis, releasing hemoglobin. Now, since hemoglobin class is in the plasma, haptoglobin would now bind to it. And haptoglobin would now be processed by the mononuclear phagocyte system. Now, since the mononuclear phagocyte system would cause a depletion of haptoglobin, three things would occur. Number one, it would be excreted as free hemoglobin. Number two would be it would be turned into hemosiderin, converted to hemosiderin. Number three, free hemoglobin would be oxidized to methemoglobin, causing the release of your heme or yung iron part. Now, heme class is now found in your plasma. Ngayon, meron tayong tinatawag na plasma protein known as your hemopexin. Si hemopexin class would bind to the free heme. Magbabind siya ngayon to the free heme where it would now transport it to the liver for catabolism or to be catabolized. So, ganyan ang intravascular hemolysis nyo nangyayari. Now, merong another pathway dito, class. Let's say lang that your yung hemopexin nyo is used up. Ang mangyayari dyan, if your hemopexin is used up, class, ngayon papasok si albumin. Albumin now, class, would now bind to heme, forming what we call methem albumin, or also known as your Fairless pigment. So for the last time, class, ulitin ko, in intravascular hemolysis, when your RBC undergoes hemolysis, it will release hemoglobin. Hemoglobin class will now bind to the plasma protein haptoglobin. Haptoglobin class would be processed by the mononuclear phagocyte system, and this would cause your haptoglobin to be depleted. When it is depleted, class, merong three outcomes. It would be excreted as free hemoglobin. Free hemoglobin would become hemosiderin, or free hemoglobin would be oxidized to methemoglobin. Now, when it is oxidized to methemoglobin, class, it would release yung heme or yung iron part. What happens is that heme would now be in the plasma, and the plasma protein hemopexin will bind to the heme class where it would transport to the liver to be catabolized. Now, there is another possible pathway, class. What if yung heme is used up or yung hemopexin is used up? When that happens, class, walang hemopexin, let's say walang hemopexin sa plasma nyo, albumin, class, would be the one to attach to heme, forming your methemalbumin, also known as your Fairless pigment. So I hope you understand the diagram of intravascular hemolysis. So please copy. Okay, so we're done with the intravascular part. Let's go naman class to your extravascular hemolysis or your diagram. So this one. So again, copy. So this time class, RBC again would be hemolyze. May undergo na naman siya ng hemolysis. When that happens class, hemoglobin would be released. Now, sa intravascular part class, instead of having haptoglobin, kasi wala na to sa plasma eh, this is occurring outside the blood vessel. So, wala kang, you don't have here haptoglobin. So, what happens is that yung hemoglobin nyo would be destroyed into three parts. We now have here yung heme part. We now have yung globin part. And we now have yung biliverdin. Yung biliverdin class galing yan sa hemoglobin. So, si heme class would now go or would be attached to yung tinatawag nating transferrin. Now, transferrin class would either do the following. He would transport heme to the bone marrow, or it would be stored. It would be stored in MPS, specifically sa spleen class. Sa spleen as ferritin or hemosiderin. So, yan yung outcome ng heme nyo. Heme would be attached to transferrin, and transferrin would transport heme to the bone marrow, or it would be stored in the mononuclear phagocyte system sa spleen class as ferritin or hemosiderin. Si globin nyo naman class would be excreted or would be processed to become an amino acid. And from an amino acid, it would be excreted as uric acid class sa inyong urine. Si biliverdin nyo class, please take note of this. Si biliverdin nyo would become or would be converted into your bilirubin. Si bilirubin nyo ngayon class would now cause the binding of your albumin. It would bind with your bilirubin. Specifically, yung tinatawag nating B1. B1 would stand for unconjugated bilirubin. Albumin plus unconjugated bilirubin class. This would now go to the liver. And in the liver class, it is converted. It is converted by your enzyme bilirubin glucuronide gluco sorry GLUCORONIDE to become your B2 or yung tinatawag natin conjugated bilirubin where it would now go to the bile duct. Pupunta ngayon siya sa bile duct natin. Tapos pupunta ngayon siya sa intestinal tract. And from the intestinal tract class, co-convert na naman siya into becoming your urobilinogen. And urobilinogen class would be excreted into two ways. It could become your urobilinogen, or it can become your fecal urobilin. So, yan ang nangyayari sa extravascular hemolysis. Siguro class, pag nakita niyo itong diagram na ito, iisip niyo, galing talaga ni Sir magsulat. Sorry na class, sorry na. So, ulitin ko. For extravascular hemolysis class, RBC class would be hemolyzed. And it would cause the release of hemoglobin. Since this time class, walang haptoglobin dyan, Hemoglobin would be degraded into three products: the heme, the globin, and the biliverdin. Si hemio class would now attach to transferrin, and it would transport into two ways. Ita-transport niya sa bone marrow, or ita-transport niya sa monophagocyte system, specifically sa spleen, to be stored as ferritin or hemosiderin. Sa bone marrow class, pag transport yung iron dyan, it would be used in erythropoiesis. So, yan ang nangyayari dyan. And then yung globin part class would be further degraded becoming amino acid. Kasi di ba ang globin nyo, protein. And amino acid class would again be further degraded and to be filtered out in the urine as uric acid. Now, si biliverdin class yung medyo mahaba. Biliverdin would be converted to bilirubin. Albumin plus unconjugated bilirubin or yung B1 would go to the liver where it would be converted to become B2 or conjugated bilirubin by bilirubin glucuronide. GLUCURONID. Where it would now go, once B2 na siya class, pupunta siya sa bile duct, pupunta ngayon siya sa intestinal tract, then it would become urobilinogen, and then it would be secreted via the stool or in the urine. Kapag urine urobilinogen. Kapag feces, it would be excreted as fecal urobilin. So, ayun siya. So, please copy. Okay, let's continue. So this is the normal values of your RBC class. Now, RBC's class are always in the millions. Now, meron tayong dalawang unit. We have the conventional. Kapag conventional class, this is your cubic millimeter. Cubic millimeter is written like that. MM3. Nilagyan ko lang ng ganyan class para ma-emphasize na naka-superscript siya. Yun yung term. Superscript. Yan. And SI naman class is your times 10 raised to the 12. This is for RBC. Kapag WBC class, times 10 raised to the 9th power. Hindi ko na maalala kasi yung exact explanation kung paano SI. But it just has something to do with the conversion. Imumove mo lang yung I already forgot sorry. Yung number of, yung 12 dyan, yun yung ilang beses mong minove. So, let's try it nga. So, 6.2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So, kulang pa ng dalawang zero. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So, yan ang conversion niya, class. So, 6.2 times 10 raised to the 12 per liter. Yan ang niya. So, lagi yang may per liter, class. So, for men, it would be 5 million to 6.2 million per cubic mm. When you convert this This is 5.0 to 6.2 times 10 raised to the 12 per liter. Women naman is 4 million to 5.5 million per cubic mm. 4.0 to 5.5 times 10 raised to the 12 per liter. Late pregnancy is 3 million to 5 million raised to the cubic mm. 3.0 to 5.0 times 10 raised to 12 per liter. Then at birth, 7 million class per cubic mm. SI is 7.0 times 10 raised to the 12 per liter. Infant, 3 months to 3 years old, 4 million to 5 million per cubic mm. 4.0 to 5.0 times 10 raised to the 12 per liter. So yan ang normal values. Please copy. Okay, let's continue. Now let's talk about the metabolic pathway of your RBC. Now RBCs are known to exhibit deformability when they pass through the capillaries, meaning class they could change shape. Kaya din nilang mag-squeeze through the capillaries. Now this is possible due to the following: the biconcave shape, the discoid geometry, the elasticity and pliancy of its membrane, the cytoplasmic viscosity. So please copy. All right, let's continue. Now, the RBC metabolic pathway class. Now, since RBCs have no nucleus, they would lack a mitochondria. Now, if you still remember, ang mitochondria nyo is the powerhouse of your cell. It produces the ATP. Thus, it would rely, since walang nucleus, walang mitochondria class, RBCs would rely on the anaerobic glycolysis for its energy, known as your adenosine triphosphate. Now, there are four pathways on how RBC would get its energy. You have yung Emden-Meyerhof, hexose monophosphate shunt, or your pentose phosphate shunt, your Rappaport-Lewis bearing, your methemoglobin reductase pathway. Okay, let's continue. So let's talk about the first pathway class, the Emden-Meyerhof pathway. Now, the Emden-Meyerhof pathway class is an anaerobic pathway. It would metabolize glucose to pyruvate by consuming two AP molecules, which generates four ATP molecules or glucose molecules, thus gaining two ATP molecules. They generate 90 to 95% of energy needed for your RBC. They affect patients with pyruvate kinase deficiency. Functions in the maintenance of RBC shape, flexibility, and cation pumps. So please copy. Now let's continue. Next class is the hexose monophosphate shunt or the pentose phosphate shunt. It would metabolize 5 to 10% of your G6P or your glucose 6 phosphate into nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate or your NADPH. This is an aerobic pathway class. It detoxifies H2O2 from oxygen reduction that would destroy heme, iron, and lipids containing thiol groups. It would protect RBCs from oxidative injury. Affected in patients with G6PD deficiency. If deficient, intracellular oxidants can be neutralized and globin would denature and would precipitate as Heinz bodies, which leads to RBCs becoming bite cells after split splenic pitting. So please take note of that, class. If you have G6PD deficiency, class, yung mga intracellular oxidants will not be neutralized, and this would cause globin to degenerate, mga protein precipitates known as Heinz bodies. So please copy. Okay, let's continue. Next class is your Rappaport-Lewis bearing. It allows the RBC to regulate oxygen transport during conditions of hypoxia or acid-base balance. It permits the accumulation of your 2,3 dipho dipho diphosphogyceric acid or your DPG, which is essential for maintaining normal oxygen tension and regulating hemoglobin affinity. So please copy. Let's go to the next and the last one, the methemoglobin reductase pathway, class. It maintains iron in the ferrous state. In the absence of the methemoglobin reductase or cytochrome B5 reductase, methemoglobin would accumulate and thus it cannot carry oxygen, class. So please remember that yung methemoglobin yun na yan, yung methemoglobin reductase, cytochrome B5 reductase. It's the one that would allow the conversion of your methemoglobin, thus maintaining the ferrous form of your iron. Because the ferrous form of iron, class, would carry oxygen, not ferric. So very important pathway siya, class. So please copy. Alright, so that ends it, class. So the reference is your Rodax. So thank you.